told me I was his future, the one he was leaving his fragile wife for. He'd whisper it against my skin in the penthouse overlooking Central Park. The city lights a glittering promise of the life we'd build. He said she was a ghost in their marriage, a placeholder until I came along. But then the door to our love nest swung open, and there she was, his pregnant, fragile wife. And in her hands, she held not divorce papers, but the inheritance documents that turned his multi-billion-dollar empire to dust, and his promises to me into lies. The city of New York always glittered, but from the 82nd floor penthouse of the 157 skyscraper, it was a galaxy laid at your feet. This was Adrian Sterling's world, a universe he commanded with the same ruthless precision he used to build his real estate empire. Tonight, however, the master of the universe was a humble supplicant, his lips tracing a reverent path along the porcelain skin of Chloe Duval. "You," he murmured, his voice a low thrum against her neck, "are the only real thing in my life." Chloe arched into him, a languid, feline stretch. Her fingers tipped with immaculate crimson, tangled in his dark, expertly styled hair. "And what about Amelia?" She purred the name, a deliberate, silken dart. Adrian's breath hitched for a fraction of a second. "Amelia is an obligation, a memory, a ghost in a house that was never a home." He lifted his head, his impossibly blue eyes locking with hers. They were the color of a summer sky, a sky that promised endless warmth, a sky that Chloe had convinced herself was hers alone to bask in. "You are my future, Chloe, the mother of my children, the real Mrs. Sterling." The words were a potent cocktail of everything she'd ever craved: security status, and above all, victory. Chloe, a former gallery assistant who had learned early that her beauty was a currency, had invested 5 years of her life in Adrian. 5 years of stolen weekends, clandestine dinners, and the gnawing, ever-present reality of being the other woman. But she wasn't just any mistress. She was an investment banker's daughter who had seen her family lose everything. She knew the value of a sure thing, and Adrian Sterling, with his chiseled jaw and a net worth that flirted with the GDP of a small nation, was the surest thing in Manhattan. "Prove it," she challenged, her voice a seductive whisper. "The Amelia problem. When does it go away?" Adrian sighed, a theatrical sound of a man burdened by the weight of his own honor. "Soon, my love. Very soon. Her pregnancy, it complicates things. She's so fragile, so delicate. The doctor says any stress could be detrimental. Fragile. Delicate." The words painted a picture of a wilting flower, a porcelain doll that might shatter at the slightest touch. This was the image Adrian had carefully cultivated of his wife Amelia Sterling. And Chloe had bought it wholesale. She pictured a mousy, unassuming woman, probably swathed in beige cashmere. Her days a monotonous cycle of charity luncheons and waiting for a husband who was never coming home. A woman utterly oblivious to the vibrant, passionate world Adrian shared with her. A few miles downtown, in a sprawling pre-war apartment on Park Avenue, the supposedly fragile Amelia Sterling was not wilting. She was in fact methodically reviewing a stack of legal documents with a focus that would have made a seasoned litigator proud. Her baby bump, a prominent, perfect sphere under a simple silk blouse, was the only soft curve in a room filled with the sharp angles of law books and financial reports. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from her private investigator, a terse man named Mr. Jones. "He's at the penthouse. She's with him," as predicted. Amelia's fingers, steady and unadorned, save for a simple platinum wedding band, typed a reply. "Thank you, Jones. Continue surveillance. I need the timeline airtight." She stood and walked over to the grand window, looking out at the same city skyline that Chloe was currently claiming as her own. But Amelia saw something different. She didn't see a glittering promise. She saw a battlefield, and she had been preparing for this war for a very long time. Amelia wasn't a fool. She had known about Chloe for 3 of the 5 years Chloe had been with Adrian. The signs were there for anyone willing to look: the late-night meetings, the scent of a strange, expensive perfume clinging to his suits. Chloe favored the heady notes of Baccarat Rouge 540, a scent Amelia now associated with betrayal, the sudden, almost frantic generosity that always followed a particularly long business trip. At first, the pain had been a physical thing, a crushing weight in her chest that made it hard to breathe. She had loved Adrian, or at least the man she thought he was, the charming, brilliant architect of his own destiny, who had swept her off her feet at a Sotheby's auction. He had pursued her with a single-minded intensity, making her feel like the most cherished woman in the world. He had married her in a lavish ceremony at the St. Regis, a society event that had been the talk of the town. The illusion had shattered slowly, then all at once. The discovery wasn't a dramatic confrontation. It was a quiet click of a laptop, an email left open. "My darling, see, I live for the moments we steal. A." Her first instinct was to scream, to throw priceless vases, to pack a bag and leave. But then she remembered her grandfather's words. Elias Vance was not a man given to emotional outbursts. He was a shrewd, old-money patriarch who had built his own fortune in shipping before it was fashionable. On her wedding day, he had taken her aside, his grip on her arm surprisingly firm. "Listen to me, little bird," he had said, his voice a gravelly rasp. "That man you're marrying, he's a shark. He sees you, our name, our history, as another acquisition. Enjoy the ride, but never, ever let him see the cards you're holding. And always have an exit strategy." At the time, she had dismissed it as the cynicism of an old man. Now his words were a lifeline. So she didn't scream. She didn't cry, not where anyone could see. She swallowed her pain and began to plan. She played the part of the perfect, trusting wife, the fragile Amelia, with an Oscar-worthy performance. She redecorated their home, hosted his insufferable business partners, and smiled serenely at charity galas, all while her mind was a whirlwind of calculations. Her pregnancy was not, as Adrian believed, a complication. It was a catalyst. It was the final piece of her strategy falling into place. It was the move that would checkmate the king. The inheritance papers spread across her desk were not from Adrian's side of the family. The sterling fortune, vast as it was new money built on leveraged debt and aggressive takeovers. It was a house of cards propped up by Adrian's reputation. The papers in front of Amelia were different. They were from her grandfather, Elias Vance, and they were ironclad. Elias had passed away 6 months prior, leaving Amelia not just his immense, diversified and debt-free fortune, but also his controlling shares in Vance Global, a logistics and shipping conglomerate with assets that dwarfed Adrian's real estate holdings. The catch, the beautiful, intricate, and utterly brilliant catch, was in the fine print of the will clause Amelia herself had helped her grandfather's lawyers draft years ago. The clause stipulated that full control of the Vance inheritance and the majority shares in the company would transfer to Amelia upon one of 2 conditions: the birth of her first legitimate heir or conclusive proof of spousal infidelity. Amelia's hand rested protectively on her belly. Her heir was coming. And thanks to Mr. Jones, the proof of infidelity was not just conclusive. It was a mountain of evidence complete with photographs, hotel receipts, and sworn affidavits. She had been waiting for the right moment, the moment of maximum impact. Adrian had been growing bolder, more careless, convinced of his wife's fragility and ignorance. He had started talking about restructuring his company, hinting at the need for a massive infusion of capital. He had even laughably suggested they use some of her family money as collateral for a new risky venture in Dubai. He was preparing to ask for a divorce, planning to offer her a paltry settlement, while he and Chloe rode off into the sunset on the back of her grandfather's legacy. He saw her as a bridge to a greater fortune. He had no idea she was about to burn that bridge to the ground. And Chloe, the ambitious, beautiful Chloe, was the perfect pawn in this high-stakes game. Her confidence, her belief in Adrian's promises, was the very thing that would make his downfall so exquisitely complete. Amelia almost pitied her. Almost. But pity was a luxury she couldn't afford. This wasn't just about a cheating husband. This was about survival. It was about protecting her child, her legacy, and honoring the grandfather who had taught her that the most dangerous sharks are the ones that swim in tailored suits. She picked up the final document. It was a notarized copy of Elias Vance's will. Tucked neatly behind it was a one-page summary drafted by her lawyer outlining the immediate and irreversible transfer of assets. And on top of that, she placed a small, glossy photograph. It was taken by Mr. Jones just an hour ago. Adrian and Chloe locked in a passionate embrace on the balcony of the 157 penthouse, the lights of New York twinkling obliviously around them. She slipped the papers into a sleek leather portfolio. She checked her reflection in the hallway mirror. Her eyes, a deep, intelligent brown, were solemn. There was no trace of the fragile woman Adrian described. In her place stood a queen ready to reclaim her kingdom. "Time to go," she said softly to her reflection, a small, knowing smile playing on her lips. The future, after all, waits for no one. The air in the 157 penthouse was thick with the scent of impending triumph. Chloe, wrapped in a silk robe that matched the silvery sheen of her hair, swirled a glass of vintage Dom Perignon, the bubbles a fizzing reflection of her own effervescent mood. Adrian was on the phone in the adjoining study, his voice a low, confident murmur. He was closing a deal he'd said the final piece of the puzzle. "It's done," he announced, striding back into the living room, a wolfish grin spreading across his face. He loosened his tie, the knot of a man unbound by convention or consequence. "The funding for the Dubai project is secured. We're going to build a new wonder of the world, you and I." He pulled her into his arms, his kiss deep and proprietary. "Everything is falling into place. I spoke with my lawyer today. We're drafting the divorce papers. A generous settlement for Amelia, of course. Something to keep her comfortable." Comfortable. Chloe's voice was laced with a playful scorn. "Darling, the woman wears beige. Her idea of comfortable is probably a lifetime subscription to a book club." Adrian laughed, a rich, booming sound that filled the cavernous room. "Exactly. She won't fight it. She doesn't have it in her. She'll sign the papers, take her settlement, and fade away. And then my love?" He tilted her chin up, his gaze intense. "The world is ours. A real wedding, a family. The sterling name will mean more than ever before." This was the moment Chloe had been waiting for, the culmination of years of calculated patience. She felt a thrill course through her, a potent mix of adrenaline and vindication. She was no longer the secret, the footnote. She was the headline. She thought of the women she'd grown up with, the ones who had married for sensible, boring stability. They would all be reading about her Chloe Duval, the woman who had captured the king. What about the inheritance? Chloe asked the question, a final, necessary piece of due diligence. Amelia's family, they're not exactly paupers. Adrian waved a dismissive hand. Old money. Slow money. It's tied up in trusts and ancient portfolios. She can't touch the principal without a board of trustees who still think the telegraph is a revolutionary piece of technology. What I'm offering her will be more liquid cash than she's ever seen. She'll be happy. Trust me. He was so confident, so utterly convinced of his own narrative. It was this absolute self-assurance that had drawn Chloe to him in the first place. He didn't just enter a room. He conquered it. He saw the world not as it was, but as he willed it to be. And in his world, Amelia was a footnote, a ghost. A sharp, authoritative buzz from the penthouse's private elevator cut through their conversation. Adrian frowned. I'm not expecting anyone. He glanced at his Rolex. The staff left an hour ago. Chloe felt a flicker of unease. They were 82 floors up, cocooned in a fortress of wealth and privacy. Uninvited guests were not part of the architecture. Adrian strode to the foyer, his annoyance palpable. Who is it? He barked into the intercom. A voice calm and clear replied through the speaker. A voice that was both familiar and chillingly out of place. It's your wife, Adrian. Let me in. The blood drained from Adrian's face. He shot a panicked look at Chloe, his composure shattering like a dropped champagne flute. Amelia, what the hell is she doing here? Chloe's heart hammered against her ribs. Amelia. The ghost, the fragile, wilting flower. Here. Now. It was impossible. It was a nightmare. She scrambled to pull her robe tighter, suddenly feeling exposed, cheapened. The penthouse, which moments before had felt like her kingdom, now felt like a sup. Get in the bedroom, Adrian hissed, his voice a panicked whisper. Now go. But it was too late. Before Chloe could move, the elevator doors slid open with a soft, final ding. Amelia Sterling stepped into the foyer. She was not what Chloe had pictured. There was no beige cashmere, no mousy demeanor. Amelia was wearing a tailored navy blue maternity dress that hugged her bump, a picture of elegant power. Her dark hair was pulled back in a sleek chignon, accentuating the clean, aristocratic lines of her face. Her expression was one of serene, unassailable calm. She looked not at Chloe, but directly at her husband, her gaze level and unnervingly direct. And in her hands, she held a slim black leather portfolio. Amelia. Adrian stammered, his voice a strangled mess. He ran a hand through his hair, his earlier swagger completely gone. What are you doing here? You should be resting, the doctor said. The doctor said I should avoid stress. Amelia finished for him, her voice cool and even. And I've found there is nothing more stressful than living a lie. So I've come to end it. Her eyes for the first time flickered towards Chloe. It was not a look of anger or jealousy. It was something far more unnerving, a look of clinical assessment, as if she were examining a specimen under a microscope. Chloe Duval. I presume. Amelia said, her tone polite, almost conversational. Baccarat Rouge, 540. A bold choice. My husband has terrible taste in perfume, and it seems in women. Chloe felt a hot flush of shame and anger. She opened her mouth to say something, to defend herself, to lash out, but the words wouldn't come. She was utterly disarmed by the woman standing before her. This was no ghost. This was a reckoning. Adrian finally found his voice, a blustering, desperate attempt to regain control. Amelia, this is not the time or the place. You're not well. Let me take you home. We can talk about this, whatever this is, tomorrow. He reached for her arm, but Amelia took a deliberate step back, her movement fluid and certain. Don't touch me, she said, the words as sharp and cold as ice. We have nothing to talk about. Everything that needs to be said is right here. She walked past him into the center of the magnificent living room, the city lights framing her silhouette. She placed the leather portfolio on the marble coffee table with a soft, definitive thud. You were telling Ms. Duval about your future, I believe Amelia said, her eyes boring into Adrian's, your new wonder of the world in Dubai. The sterling name meaning more than ever before. It all sounded very ambitious. Adrian was pale, his bravado crumbling into dust. Amelia, please. You told me you needed capital. She continued, her voice relentless. You suggested we leverage some of my family money. You assumed my grandfather's fortune was a locked box, and that you, with your superior intellect, would be the one to pick the lock. She paused, letting the silence stretch thick with tension. Chloe stood frozen by the bar, a silent, unwilling spectator to the detonation of her own dreams. You see, Adrian, Amelia said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. You made two fatal miscalculations. The first was underestimating my grandfather, and the second was underestimating me. She opened the portfolio. This, she said, sliding the top document across the polished marble, is a copy of my grandfather Elias Vance's last will and testament. Adrian stared at it, his expression a mixture of confusion and dawning horror. Amelia continued, her voice a precise surgical instrument. As you know, he left me his entire estate, including his 60% controlling interest in Vance Global, a company, I might add, that is currently valued at approximately $22 billion. A bit more than old slow money, wouldn't you say? She let that sink in before delivering the killing blow. There was, however, a clause, a rather specific one. It states that my full unconditional control of all assets, including the immediate liquidation of certain trusts and the full voting power of the shares, is triggered by one of two events. She looked down at her stomach, her hand gently cradling her baby bump. The first is the birth of my first legitimate heir, which, as you can see, is imminent. Then her eyes cold and hard as diamonds snapped back to Adrian. She slid the glossy photograph across the table. It landed face up, a perfect, damning image of Adrian and Chloe's passionate kiss on that very balcony. The second trigger. Amelia said, her voice ringing with the finality of a judge's gavel, is conclusive proof of spousal infidelity, which, thanks to your carelessness and the excellent work of my investigator, I now have in abundance. She tapped a manicured finger on the document. As of 6:45 p.m. this evening, when my lawyer filed this notarized evidence with the probate court, the Elias Vance spousal clause was officially activated. All assets, all shares, all control transferred to me, unconditionally, irrevocably. Adrian's face was ashen. He looked from the photograph to the will, his mind struggling to process the scale of the catastrophe. What does this mean? Amelia gave a small, humorless smile. It means, Adrian, that the bridge capital you were sourcing for your Dubai project, the loan you secured from a consortium that, unbeknownst to you, is heavily backed by Vance Global, has been pulled. It means the collateral you put up, namely a significant portion of Sterling Holdings, is now forfeit. It means that your company, which is leveraged to the hilt, will be insolvent by morning. She turned her gaze to Chloe, whose champagne glass had slipped from her numb fingers, shattering on the floor. And it means Amelia said, her voice devoid of any emotion, that the future he promised you does not exist. He told you that you were his future, but he was trying to build it with my inheritance, and he no longer has a single penny of it. She looked back at the man she had once loved, the man who had called her fragile. He looked broken, a hollowed-out shell of the titan he had been just minutes before. "You are not the king, Adrian," she said softly. "You were just a jester in my court, and your reign is over." With that, she turned her back straight, her head held high, and walked towards the elevator, leaving the ruins of 2 lives and a multi-billion-dollar empire in her wake. The elevator doors slid shut, and she was gone. The silence that descended upon the penthouse was heavier than any sound. It was the silence of a tomb, the suffocating quiet that follows a cataclysm. The city lights still twinkled outside, a mocking, indifferent audience to the carnage within. The shattered champagne glass on the floor was a perfect metaphor for the evening for their lives. Adrian Sterling, the man who bent skylines to his will, stood frozen in the center of the room. His face was a mask of disbelief, the color of wet concrete. He stared at the documents on the table, the will, the photograph, as if they were venomous snakes. He reached out a trembling hand, then snatched it back as if the paper itself might burn him. "No," he whispered. The word was a dry, rasping sound, a single crack in the monolithic silence. "No, it's not possible." Chloe, who had been paralyzed by the bar, finally found the ability to move. Her own dreams, so vibrant and close just moments ago, had evaporated into a bitter smoke. The penthouse now felt like a gilded cage, and the door had just slammed shut. "Adrian," she said, her voice tentative, thin. "Adrian." What did she mean? Insolvent forfeit? It's a bluff, right? It's a threat. She's just an angry, scorned wife. Adrian didn't seem to hear her. He was pacing now, a caged animal, his movements jerky and uncoordinated. He tugged at his tie, which now felt like a noose. He ran his hands through his hair, dislodging the perfect, expensive styling. "Vance Global," he muttered, his eyes wide with a dawning, terrifying comprehension. The consortium. The lead investor was a shell corp based in the Cayman Islands. A subsidiary. Oh God. He stopped pacing and stared at Chloe, but his eyes looked right through her. She knew. She knew all along. The Dubai deal. She didn't just pull the funding. She was the funding. She lured me in. She set the trap. The intricate, diabolical brilliance of it hit him like a physical blow. Amelia, his quiet, fragile Amelia, had orchestrated his downfall with the precision of a grandmaster playing chess. She had used his own ambition, his own arrogance, his own infidelity as the weapons of his destruction. He thought he was playing her, but he had been her pawn from the very beginning. Chloe's own mind was reeling. She wasn't a fool. She understood the language of finance and power. Insolvent wasn't a threat. It was a death sentence. The future Adrian had promised her, the society wedding, the status, the security, was built on the foundation of his empire. And that foundation had just been reduced to rubble. "So what does this mean?" she demanded, her voice rising, a note of hysteria creeping in. "What happens now, Adrian, talk to me. It means it's over," he said, his voice flat dead. He finally sank onto one of the plush sofas, his body deflating as if all the air had been let out of him. He looked like a king who had just been dethroned, stripped of his robes and cast out of his own castle. "It's all gone." The anger came then, hot and blinding, replacing Chloe's shock. This wasn't her fault. She had invested 5 years of her life in this man and his promises. She had endured the whispers, the secrecy, the lonely holidays. For what? To end up with nothing in a borrowed penthouse, watching her future crumble, gone. "What do you mean, gone?" she shrieked, her carefully constructed composure shattering completely. "You told me she was nothing, a ghost. You said you had it all under control. You promised me." "I thought I did," he yelled back, his own desperation and fury erupting. "How was I supposed to know she was capable of this? She reads poetry, for God's sake. She volunteers at the library. She's—" "Amelia. Well, Amelia just wiped you out." Chloe's voice was sharp, accusatory. "And what about me? Where does this leave me? You said you were leaving her for me. You said I was your future." Adrian looked at her, and for the first time Chloe saw not adoration or passion in his eyes, but a cold, resentful emptiness. In his ruin, she was no longer a prize to be won, but another complication, another reminder of his spectacular failure. "The future," he scoffed, a bitter, ugly sound. "There is no future. Don't you get it? I have nothing, less than nothing. I'm going to be buried in lawsuits and debt before the week is out. The life I promised you, the life we had, it was all fueled by money I don't have anymore. It's gone." The transactional nature of their relationship was suddenly laid bare, stripped of the pretty words and expensive gifts. He had bought her time, her affection, her loyalty, and now his credit was gone. "So that's it?" Chloe asked, her voice trembling with a mixture of rage and fear. "You just lose everything and I'm supposed to just— what, disappear? What do you want from me?" "Chloe," Adrian snarled, getting to his feet. "Blood, I have nothing left to give. My company is gone. My reputation is gone. My wife, my pregnant wife, just publicly castrated me, and I have a feeling she's only just begun." The mention of the baby, the legitimate heir, was another twist of the knife for Chloe. It was the one thing she could never give him, the one thing Amelia had used to seal her victory. The fight devolved from there, a toxic explosion of blame and recrimination. All the years of unspoken resentments, of power imbalances and deceit came pouring out. Chloe accused him of being a liar and a fool. He accused her of being a gold digger who was only with him for his money. In the heart of their love nest, surrounded by the trappings of a life that no longer existed, they tore each other apart. "You knew he was married," he shouted. "You told me you were leaving her," she screamed back. The argument raged until they were both exhausted, their voices raw, their anger spent. They were left in the wreckage, two strangers who had built a fantasy on a foundation of lies. Finally, Chloe walked towards the bedroom, not with the languid sensuality of before, but with the weary steps of a defeated soldier. "I'm getting my things," she said, her voice hollow. "Where will you go?" Adrian asked, not out of concern, but with the flat curiosity of a man surveying the extent of the damage. Chloe stopped at the doorway and looked back at him. The man she had once seen as a god now looked small, pathetic, drowning in the ruins of his own making. "I don't know," she said, and for the first time a genuine, terrifying uncertainty filled her. But I know I can't stay here. This place, it's a graveyard. Meanwhile, Amelia was not at home resting. She was in a sleek, glass-walled boardroom on the 50th floor of the Vance Global building overlooking the dark expanse of the Hudson River. The room was filled with the quiet, focused energy of people who understood power. Her legal team, headed by a sharp, silver-haired woman named Eleanor Vance, a distant but fiercely loyal cousin, was assembled. A crisis management PR team was on standby. "The filing was successful, Amelia," Eleanor said, pushing a tablet across the polished mahogany table. "The transfer is complete. The board has been officially notified of the change in majority, ownership, and control." Amelia nodded, her expression serene. She took a sip of chamomile tea. "And the Dubai Consortium." "As you instructed," a junior lawyer chimed in. "The capital call was rescinded at 7:00 p.m. Eastern Time, citing unforeseen risk and material misrepresentation by Sterling Holdings. The default clause was triggered. Our acquisitions team is preparing the paperwork to absorb the forfeited assets. By our preliminary estimates, it will give Vance Global a significant entry into the luxury real estate market at a fraction of the cost." Amelia allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. It wasn't just revenge. It was good business. Her grandfather would have been proud. "What's our next move with Adrian?" Eleanor asked, her tone pragmatic. "For now, we let him drown," Amelia said calmly. "The financial press will get wind of the insolvency by morning. The sharks will start circling. Let him flail. Let him see who his real friends are. And the divorce. File it first thing in the morning," Amelia instructed. "On grounds of adultery. We'll be generous. We won't ask for a penny from him. The optics of that are important. This isn't about taking his money. It's about taking her power back. It's about him having nothing left." Her phone buzzed. It was Mr. Jones. Subject 2. "Duval has left the penthouse with luggage. Subject 1, Sterling, remains. He appears to be making a lot of frantic phone calls." Amelia typed a reply. "His calls won't be answered. See to it." Eleanor raised an eyebrow. Amelia explained, "My grandfather taught me that in a war, you control the lines of communication. For the next 24 hours, anyone of consequence that Adrian tries to call his bankers, his lawyers, his board members will find their calls being mysteriously dropped or routed to a very apologetic but unhelpful junior assistant." Eleanor Vance chuckled a dry, appreciative sound. "Elias was a bastard. A brilliant bastard." "Yes, he was," Amelia agreed, a genuine warmth in her voice. She stood up and walked to the window, placing a hand on the cool glass. She looked down at the city, at the endless river of lights. It wasn't a battlefield anymore. It was her kingdom. She had not just survived. She had conquered. The fragile flower had revealed her thorns of steel. And as she looked out at her new empire, built from the ashes of her husband's betrayal, she felt not a shred of regret. She felt only the calm, steady heartbeat of her unborn child and the fierce, exhilarating promise of her own future. The dawn broke over Manhattan with a cruel, indifferent beauty. For Adrian Sterling, it was the dawn of a new, terrifying reality. The frantic, unanswered phone calls of the previous night gave way to the cold, hard print of the morning's financial news. It started with a leak, a single devastating article on the Wall Street Journal's website, posted just before the markets opened. Sterling Holdings on brink of collapse as key funding for Dubai. Mega project mysteriously evaporates. The word mysteriously was a journalistic courtesy. Within an hour, the mystery was solved as rival outlets smelling blood in the water dug deeper. The narrative quickly coalesced. The pooled funding was linked to Vance Global, and the sudden seismic shift in control at Vance Global was linked to Elias Vance's spousal infidelity clause, activated by his heiress, Amelia Vance Sterling. By 9:30 a.m., when the opening bell rang on Wall Street, Sterling Holdings' stock was in freefall. It plummeted with a velocity that was breathtaking to behold. The company he had built from the ground up, the symbol of his genius and ambition, was being eviscerated in real time on the screens of every terminal in the financial world. Adrian sat in the silent penthouse, a relic of a life he no longer lived, watching the carnage unfold on a giant television screen. He hadn't slept. He hadn't showered. A half-empty bottle of scotch sat on the marble table next to Amelia's damning documents. His phone, which had been his scepter of power, now rang incessantly with calls he couldn't bear to answer. Angry investors, panicked board members, opportunistic journalists. His lawyer, a bulldog named Marcus Thorne, finally got through. "Adrian!" "What the hell is going on?" Marcus's voice was a frantic shout. "My phone has been blowing up." "They're saying Vance Global pulled your funding, that you're in default. They're saying your wife. That Amelia. It's true." Adrian said, his voice a dead monotone. "All of it." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. How is this possible?" The Vance inheritance was supposed to be locked up tighter than Fort Knox. "She had a key," Adrian replied, the words tasting like ash, "and I was stupid enough to hand it to her." "We can fight this, Adrian," Marcus insisted, his litigator's instincts kicking in. "We can challenge the will claim, undue influence, emotional distress." "Well, on what grounds, Marcus?" Adrian laughed, a hollow, mirthless sound. "That my pregnant wife was so distressed by my 5-year affair that she cleverly and legally bankrupted me. I don't think that'll play well in court. She didn't just beat me. She checkmated me. The game is over." As if on cue, there was another buzz at the elevator. This time it wasn't Amelia. It was a courier, a young man in a crisp uniform, who looked terrified to be there. He handed Adrian a thick envelope. Inside were the divorce papers, filed that morning. Clean, simple, and utterly brutal. Amelia was citing adultery and waiving any and all claims to his assets. She wanted nothing from him. It was the ultimate power move, a public declaration that he had nothing she could possibly want. Attached was a restraining order, preventing him from coming within 500 feet of her, her home, or any Vance Global property. He was officially an exile. He dropped the papers onto the growing pile of his life's wreckage. He was no longer just losing his company. He was losing his identity. Who was Adrian Sterling without the billions, the power, the name that opened every door? He was just a man in an expensive suit with empty pockets. For Chloe Duval, the dawn was just as grim. She had spent the night in a sterile, overpriced room at the Mandarin Oriental paid for, with the dwindling credit on a card Adrian had given her. She had left the penthouse with 2 suitcases filled with designer clothes and a future that was a complete blank. Her phone was also buzzing, but not with business calls. It was her social circle, the coterie of wives and girlfriends of the New York elite. The news was spreading like wildfire through their encrypted chat groups and hushed phone calls. But the tone was not one of sympathy. It was one of schadenfreude, of vicious, triumphant gossip. "Did you hear about Chloe Duval? The Sterling affair blew up in her face. Amelia Sterling took him to the cleaners, and the mistress serves her right." I always knew she was just a glorified call girl. Now she has nothing. Chloe scrolled through the messages, her stomach churning. These were women she had lunched with, vacationed with, shared secrets with. She had thought she was on the verge of joining their ranks, of becoming one of them. Now she was their cautionary tale, the Icarus who had flown too close to the sun and had her wings of Chanel and Cartier melted away. She had been cast out. The invitations would stop. The calls would go unanswered. The doors to the exclusive restaurants and clubs which had once swung open at the mention of Adrian's name would now be firmly shut. In the brutal social ecosystem of Manhattan, she had gone from predator to prey in the space of a single evening. Desperate, she tried to call Adrian. The call went straight to voicemail. She tried again. Voicemail. She knew then that he had cut her off just as the world was cutting him off. She was a loose end, a liability he could no longer afford. The final crushing blow came from her own family. Her mother called her voice a shrill symphony of panic and disapproval. "Chloe, what have you done? Your father and I are being humiliated. Everyone is talking, after all the sacrifices we made for you. For this is how you repay us. By getting involved with a married man and becoming a public disgrace." He was going to leave her mum, Chloe cried, the justification sounding weak and pathetic even to her own ears. "Oh, stop it, Chloe. You thought you were so clever, but you were just a fool. You hitched your wagon to a falling star, and now you're going to drag us all down with you." Chloe hung up the silence in the hotel room, pressing in on her. Her mother's words echoed in her head. A fool. Was that what she was? She had seen her relationship with Adrian as a strategic investment. She had played the long game, banking on a future that now lay in ruins, and Amelia, the woman she had dismissed as a fragile non-entity, had been the true strategist all along. Amelia had been playing a different game. A game with higher stakes and deadlier consequences. And she had won. In the serene, light-filled living room of her Park Avenue apartment, Amelia was not gloating. She was methodically planning the next phase of her life. The news reports were just background noise. The collapse of Sterling Holdings was a mere footnote. Eleanor Vance sat opposite her, a file of resumes in her lap. "We need to appoint an interim CEO for the Sterling assets we've acquired. Someone to clean house and stabilize things." Amelia looked out the window, her gaze distant. "I have someone in mind." She picked up her phone and made a call. "Mr. Jones," she said when the private investigator answered. "How would you like a new job? I have a portfolio of distressed real estate assets that require a man with a certain attention to detail. The official title will be Head of Asset Management. The unofficial title will be My Bulldog." There was a pause on the line, then a low chuckle. "I think I'd like that very much, Mrs. Sterling." "Good," Amelia said. "Your first task is to liquidate the 157 penthouse. Immediately. I want all of his personal effects put in storage and the property sold. I never want to see it again." She hung up and looked at Eleanor. "Adrian built his empire on glitter and hype. We will rebuild it on substance and stability. Vance Global doesn't build monuments to ego. We build foundations." Her phone rang again. It was a number she didn't recognize. She almost ignored it, but something made her answer. "Hello." "Amelia. It's Chloe." The voice was shaky, stripped of its former purring confidence. Amelia was surprised. She had expected never to hear from the woman again. "What do you want, Chloe?" Amelia's tone was not harsh, but it was not welcoming. I just wanted to say, you won," Chloe said, her voice cracking. "You were right. He's a liar, a user. He promised me everything, and he left me with nothing. I wanted you to know that I see that now." It was a strange, pathetic olive branch. Perhaps Chloe was looking for sympathy, or perhaps absolution. Amelia felt a flicker of something, not pity, but a kind of weary understanding. Chloe was a casualty of Adrian's war, just as She-Hulk had been. They were on opposite sides, but they had both been betrayed by the same man. "Seeing the truth doesn't change what you did, Chloe," Amelia said, her voice firm, but not unkind. "You made your choices. You gambled on a man's character, and you lost. I gambled on my own strength, and I won. That's the difference between us." She continued, "My advice to you is this: stop looking for a man to build your future. Build it yourself. You are more than just someone's mistress. Or at least you can be. Goodbye, Chloe." She ended the call, leaving Chloe on the other end, stunned into silence. It was not the conversation Chloe had expected. It was not forgiveness, but it was something more valuable, a harsh, unvarnished truth. Amelia placed her phone down and put both hands on her belly. The baby kicked a strong, reassuring flutter. This was her future. Not a company, not a fortune, but a new life, a legacy of her own making. She had walked through fire not to destroy a man, but to forge herself anew in the flames. The world would talk about the fall of Adrian Sterling, the billionaire who lost it all. But Amelia knew the real story. It wasn't about his fall. It was about her rise. 6 months later, the New York City skyline was unchanged, but the landscape of power had been irrevocably altered. The name Sterling was no longer synonymous with audacious success, but with catastrophic failure. Adrian Sterling's bankruptcy had been swift and brutal, a textbook case study that would be taught in business schools for years to come. He had lost everything: the company, the penthouse, the art collection, the respect. He was a ghost in the city he had once commanded, occasionally spotted by paparazzi, looking haggard and lost, a spectre of his former self. Amelia Vance, however, was no longer Amelia Sterling. Having legally reverted to her maiden name, she had become one of the most formidable and respected figures in the global business world. She did not rule with Adrian's flashy, aggressive style, but with her grandfather's quiet, strategic brilliance. Vance Global, now bolstered by a shrewdly managed real estate portfolio, flourished under her leadership. She was known for her calm demeanor, her sharp intellect, and her utter unflappability. The press had tried to paint her as an avenging ice queen, but the narrative failed to stick. She was simply too competent, too focused on the future to be defined by the drama of the past. Her greatest achievement, however, was not in the boardroom. It was the small, perfect child who now slept peacefully in a bassinet in her home office. Elias Vance II, named after the grandfather who had taught her to be a warrior, was the center of her universe. He was a daily, gurgling reminder of what she had fought for. Motherhood had softened her edges, but hardened her resolve. She was building an empire, not for herself, but for him. One sunny afternoon, while rocking baby Eli in her arms, Amelia looked out her Park Avenue window. Down on the street, she saw a woman exit a yellow cab. The woman was dressed in a simple, professional-looking pantsuit, her once silvery blonde hair now a more natural honeyed shade. She carried a leather briefcase and walked with a purpose that Amelia had never seen in her before. It was Chloe Duval. Amelia was not surprised. After their final strange phone call, Amelia had tasked Mr. Jones, now her fiercely loyal head of asset management, to keep a discreet, non-invasive eye on Chloe. Not out of suspicion, but out of a strange, lingering curiosity. The reports had been interesting. After a few weeks of floundering, Chloe had disappeared from the social scene entirely. She had sold her designer clothes and handbags on luxury consignment sites. She had moved out of the expensive hotel and into a small, modest apartment in Brooklyn. And then she had enrolled in a course to get her real estate license. She had started at the very bottom, working for a small independent brokerage, fetching coffee and making cold calls. She was, by all accounts, relentless. She worked 18-hour days, using the knowledge of the luxury market she had gleaned from her time with Adrian, not as a shortcut to glamour, but as a tool of the trade. She was no longer trying to marry a real estate mogul. She was trying to become one small commission at a time. The gossip columns that had once delighted in her downfall now occasionally mentioned her in a different light as a tenacious, up-and-coming agent who was making a name for herself through sheer grit. Amelia watched as Chloe strode down the block and disappeared into a brownstone. She felt a complex emotion, not friendship, not forgiveness, but a quiet, detached respect. Chloe had taken her advice. She was building her own future. Perhaps Amelia mused there were many kinds of fragile. There was the fragility that breaks, and there was the fragility that is merely a shell waiting to be shed so that something stronger can emerge. Her thoughts were interrupted by a call from Eleanor Vance. "Amelia, I have some news about Adrian," Eleanor said, her voice grim. "He's been trying to secure funding for a new venture. It's pathetic, really. A small-time development in Queens. He's been using his old name, trying to trade on a reputation that no longer exists." "And?" Amelia asked, her voice neutral. "He's been approaching some of our lower-level investment managers. One of them flagged it. It seems he's making promises he can't keep, misrepresenting potential returns. It's dangerously close to fraud." Amelia was silent for a moment, listening to the soft breathing of her son. The old Amelia, the one consumed by the fire of betrayal, might have seen this as an opportunity to deliver the final crushing blow. To leak the information to ensure he was not only bankrupt, but possibly imprisoned. But she was not that person anymore. Her victory was complete. Pounding Adrian into the dust now would be a petty act, a waste of energy she would rather devote to her son and her company. Revenge was a fire that consumed everything, including the person who wielded it. She had her son. She had her legacy. Adrian Sterling was a footnote in her story, and it was time to turn the page. "Eleanor," Amelia said finally, her voice clear and decisive, "do nothing. Let him be. His ventures will fail or succeed on their own merit or lack thereof. He is no longer our concern. His name is not to be mentioned in this office again. We look forward, not back." "Understood," Eleanor replied, a hint of admiration in her tone. Amelia hung up the phone and looked down at her son. His eyes, the same deep brown as hers, blinked open and stared up at her. In them, she saw not the past, not the betrayal or the pain, but an infinite, unspoiled future. She had walked into that penthouse with inheritance, papers ready to burn a kingdom to the ground. And she had. But in its place, she had built something far more valuable, far more enduring. She had built a life. And it was a life that was entirely gloriously her own. The fragile wife was gone, and in her place stood a queen ruler of her own destiny, mother to a prince and the architect of a future built not on promises, but on strength, integrity, and the unbreakable power of a woman who had decided to save herself. And that, my friends, is the story of how a woman who was underestimated, betrayed, and left for broke turned the tables on the powerful man who wronged her. It's a reminder that the greatest strength often lies where we least expect it, and that a person's true worth is not in the money they have, but in the character they reveal when everything is on the line. Amelia's journey from a supposedly fragile wife to a formidable queen wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclamation. She reclaimed her name, her power, and her future, proving that the best inheritance is the strength you find within yourself. What if the most beautiful day of your life was used as a weapon to destroy you? Imagine a grand ballroom filled with 100 of the city's elite, all eyes on one man, a charismatic millionaire on the verge of a life-changing announcement. But this isn't a celebration of his success. It's the stage for a shocking betrayal. He's about to propose to his mistress in front of everyone. But he's forgotten one crucial detail. His pregnant wife is in the audience, and she's holding a secret that will turn his triumphant moment into a public spectacle of ruin. Stay with us as we unravel a story of love lies and a revenge so perfectly orchestrated it will leave you breathless. The lie was a gilded car, and Julian Thorne was both its prisoner and its architect. To the world, he was the golden boy of the tech industry, the visionary CEO of Nexus Innovations, a company that had revolutionized the way people connected. His life was a curated masterpiece of success, a sprawling penthouse overlooking the city, a collection of vintage cars that would make any collector weep, and a wife who was the epitome of grace and beauty, Amelia. Amelia Thorne was more than just a pretty face on Julian's arm. She was an accomplished art curator, her gallery a sanctuary of emerging talent in a city obsessed with the established. Her intelligence was as sharp as her wit, her heart as expansive as the canvases she so adored. She was the calm to his storm, the anchor to his soaring ambition. And she was pregnant with their first child, a secret they had been cherishing, a new chapter they were about to write together in the beautiful story of their lives. Or so she thought. In the weeks leading up to the Nexus Innovations 10th anniversary gala, Julian had been a different man. He was more attentive, more affectionate than he had been in months. He would come home early, bearing bouquets of Amelia's favorite peonies, his eyes filled with a tenderness that melted away the subtle anxieties that had begun to creep into her heart. He'd talk about the baby, his voice thick with emotion, his hand resting on her burgeoning belly, as if to protect their unborn child from the world. Amelia, ever the optimist, had allowed herself to believe that this was a new beginning, that the distance she had felt growing between them was just a product of his work stress. She had no idea that his renewed affection was nothing more than a carefully constructed facade, a final act of deception before the curtain fell on their marriage. The truth was, Julian was leading a double life, a life that revolved around Isabella Rossi. Isabella was a force of nature, a fiery Italian beauty with ambition that burned as brightly as her emerald eyes. A rising star in the world of fashion, blogging her social media, was a carefully curated fantasy of glamour and luxury, a life she was determined to make her own. She had met Julian at a tech conference a year ago, and their connection had been instant electric and utterly forbidden. To Isabella, Julian was not just a married man. He was a stepping stone, a golden ticket to the life she so desperately craved. She had convinced herself that their love was real, a passionate affair that eclipsed the staid, comfortable marriage he had with Amelia. She saw Amelia as a relic of Julian's past, a woman who couldn't possibly understand the depths of his ambition, the fire in his soul. Isabella was the future, and she was tired of waiting in the wings. The plan had been hatched in the hushed intimacy of a 5-star hotel suite, a place that had become their sanctuary. It was Isabella's idea, a bold, audacious move that would leave no room for retreat. "You need to choose Julian," she had whispered, her fingers tracing the sharp line of his jaw. "You can't have both. It's time to show the world who you really love. Propose to me at the gala, in front of everyone. Let them see that I am the one you choose." Julian, a man who had built an empire on calculated risks, was initially hesitant. The scandal would be enormous, the fallout unpredictable. But Isabella's words had tapped into a deep-seated insecurity. He harbored a fear of being ordinary. He had always been a man who took what he wanted, and he wanted Isabella. He wanted the thrill, the passion, the validation she offered. He had convinced himself that a clean break, however brutal, was the only way. He would be seen as a man of decisive action, a man who followed his heart no matter the cost. He would be free. So the stage was set for a public execution of his marriage. The Nexus Innovations 10th Anniversary Gala, to be held at the opulent Marina Bay Sands in Singapore, was the chosen venue. The guest list was a who's who of the global tech and finance industries. The media would be there in full force. It was the perfect platform for Julian to unveil his new life with Isabella by his side. A few days before the gala, Julian presented Amelia with a stunning diamond necklace. "A little something to celebrate us," he had said, his voice a smooth, practiced lie, "for being the most patient, loving wife a man could ask for, and for carrying our child." Amelia, her heart swelling with love, had thrown her arms around him, burying her face in his neck, inhaling the familiar scent of his cologne. A scent she had always associated with home, with safety. She was completely oblivious to the fact that in a velvet box, tucked away in his safe, lay another diamond. A diamond of staggering size and brilliance, a diamond that would soon be placed on another woman's finger. The legendary Winston Blue Diamond, a gem as deep and blue as the ocean of lies he was about to drown her in. Amelia had her own surprise planned for the gala. She had spent weeks secretly compiling a video montage of their life together. It was a love letter in moving pictures, their first date, their trip to Tuscany, their wedding day. The highlight was a clip from their wedding vows. Julian's voice, thick with unshed tears, promising to love and cherish her for all eternity. She had intended to have it played as a surprise for him during her toast, a public declaration of her love and excitement for their growing family. She had no idea that her beautiful, heartfelt gift would become her weapon of choice in a war she didn't even know she was fighting. As Amelia packed for their trip to Singapore, she hummed a soft tune, her hand resting on her belly. She felt a flutter, a gentle kick from the new life growing inside her. She smiled. Everything was perfect. She was living in a gilded cage, but she was yet to see the bars. The door was about to be flung open, not to freedom, but to a devastating truth that would shatter her world into a million pieces. The storm was gathering, and she was standing right in its eye, blissfully unaware of the destruction that was about to be unleashed. The grand ballroom of the Marina Bay Sands was a spectacle of breathtaking opulence. Crystal chandeliers like frozen waterfalls hung from the vaulted ceiling, casting a galaxy of light upon the sea of guests below. The air hummed with the symphony of clinking champagne flutes, hushed conversations, and the gentle strains of a string quartet. The elite of the global tech world were all there, dressed in their finest, their faces illuminated by the soft glow of success. This was Julian Thorne's kingdom, and tonight he was its undisputed king. Amelia, radiant in a bespoke midnight blue gown that draped elegantly over her pregnant form, moved through the crowd with an easy grace. The diamond necklace Julian had given her sparkled at her throat, a cold, beautiful lie against her warm skin. She greeted friends and acquaintances, her smile genuine, her heart full of a quiet joy. She felt a surge of pride for Julian, for the empire he had built from the ground up. She was his partner in every sense of the word, his confidant, his biggest supporter. Tonight was a celebration of their shared journey, their shared success. Julian was in his element, a charismatic whirlwind of handshakes and charming smiles. He moved from one influential guest to another, his words as smooth as the vintage champagne he sipped. But beneath the polished veneer of the successful CEO, a current of nervous energy crackled. His eyes would occasionally flit towards the entrance, a flicker of anticipation, of dread in their depths. Amelia, ever attuned to his moods, noticed his restlessness. "Everything all right, my love?" she asked, her hand finding his. "You seem a little on edge." Julian turned to her, his smile a masterpiece of deception. "Just the usual pre-speech jitters," he lied, squeezing her hand. 10 years. It's a big milestone. I want everything to be perfect." He leaned in and kissed her, a brief, almost perfunctory gesture that felt more like a performance for the benefit of those watching than a genuine expression of affection. "You look breathtaking tonight, Amelia," he murmured, his eyes holding hers for a fraction of a second too long. A flicker of something unreadable in their depths. It could have been guilt, or perhaps a final fleeting moment of regret. Amelia, reassured, smiled back at him. "You'll be brilliant, as always." A short while later, Isabella Rossi made her entrance. She was a vision in crimson, a stark, dramatic contrast to the cool blues and silvers that dominated the ballroom. Her dress was a daring, figure-hugging creation that announced her arrival with an unapologetic confidence. Heads turned, whispers followed in her wake. She was a woman who commanded attention, and tonight she was determined to hold it. She caught Julian's eye from across the room, a slow, predatory smile gracing her lips. It was a look of shared conspiracy of imminent victory. Amelia, her back to the entrance, as she chatted with the wife of a Japanese investor, missed the silent exchange entirely. The moment came after the main course had been cleared. The lights dimmed, and a spotlight found Julian as he ascended the stage. A hush fell over the ballroom. He stood at the podium, the Nexus Innovations logo glowing on the massive screen behind him. He looked out at the sea of faces, a confident smile playing on his lips. He began his speech with a walk down memory lane, his voice resonant and captivating. He spoke of the early days of Nexus Innovations, the struggles, the breakthroughs, the relentless pursuit of a dream. He was a master storyteller, weaving a narrative of innovation and perseverance that had the audience hanging on his every word. He paid tribute to his team, his investors, his partners. It was a flawless performance, the speech of a visionary leader at the pinnacle of his success. Amelia watched him from her table at the front, her heart swelling with pride. She clutched the small USB drive in her purse, the wedding video she had so lovingly prepared. She couldn't wait to see the look on his face when she played it. Then Julian's tone shifted. "Success," he said, his voice taking on a more personal, more intimate quality, "is not just about building a company. It's about building a life. It's about finding that one person who understands you, who challenges you, who inspires you to be the best version of yourself." Amelia smiled, thinking he was about to pay tribute to her, to their marriage. Her hand instinctively went to her belly. For a long time, Julian continued, his eyes scanning the crowd, I thought I had that. I thought I knew what happiness was. But life has a funny way of surprising you. It throws you a curveball when you least expect it, and you realize that everything you thought you knew, everything you thought you wanted, was wrong. A ripple of confusion went through the audience. This was not the typical corporate speech. Amelia's smile faltered. A cold knot of dread began to form in the pit of her stomach. This was not the script she had imagined. Tonight, Julian declared, his voice ringing with a newfound conviction. I want to be honest. I want to be true to myself and to my heart. There is someone in this room who has changed my life in ways I never thought possible. Someone who has shown me what true passion, what true love really is. He paused, letting the suspense build. The silence in the ballroom was absolute, thick with a palpable tension. Amelia's heart was pounding in her chest, a frantic, desperate drumbeat against her ribs. She looked around, her eyes wide with a dawning horror. And then she saw her. Isabella Rossi standing near the stage, her eyes locked on Julian, her expression a mixture of triumph and anticipation. Isabella. Julian said, his voice soft, but carrying to every corner of the room. Isabella Rossi, would you please join me on stage? A collective gasp went through the crowd. Whispers erupted like wildfire. All eyes turned to Isabella as she glided towards the stage, her crimson dress a slash of defiance against the shocked silence. She took Julian's hand, her smile radiant, triumphant. Julian turned to face her, his back to the massive screen that still bore his company's logo. He ignored the shocked faces in the crowd, the frantic whispers, the dawning realization on the faces of those who knew he was a married man. He had eyes only for Isabella. Isabella, he began, his voice thick with a rehearsed emotion. You are the most incredible woman I have ever met. You are my soulmate, my everything. I know this is sudden, but I can't live another day without you by my side. I want the world to know how much I love you. And then in front of 100 horrified guests, in front of the world's media, Julian Thorne, the celebrated tech millionaire, got down on one knee. He pulled out a velvet box, and from it, he produced a ring that silenced the room. The Winston Blue Diamond. A magnificent pear-shaped gem of an impossible, mesmerizing blue caught the light and shattered it into 1,000 glittering shards. It was a king's ransom on a platinum band. Isabella Rossi. Julian's voice boomed through the speakers. Will you marry me? Time seemed to stop. For a moment, the only sound was the frantic clicking of cameras. Isabella's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with feigned surprise. This was her moment, the culmination of all her plans, all her ambitions. But just as she opened her mouth to say yes, just as the word of her victory was about to be uttered, a flicker on the giant screen behind them stole the attention of every single person in the room. The Nexus Innovations logo dissolved, and in its place, a new image began to form. It was a scene of breathtaking beauty, a sun-drenched vineyard in Tuscany. And in the center of the frame, a younger, happier Julian Thorne looked into the eyes of his bride, Amelia. The wedding video began to play silent at first, a ghost of a memory flickering to life on the giant screen. The image was jarringly intimate in the vast, opulent ballroom. There was Julian, his face unguarded, his eyes shining with an adoration that was achingly real. He was looking at Amelia resplendent in a lace wedding gown, her smile a beacon of pure, unadulterated joy. The scene was from their wedding day 4 years prior, a day that now felt like a lifetime ago. A low murmur rippled through the crowd. Julian, still on one knee, froze. He looked up at the screen, his face a mask of disbelief and dawning horror. Isabella, her triumphant smile faltering, followed his gaze. The blood drained from her face. This was not part of the plan. Then the audio kicked in. Julian's voice, younger, more earnest, filled the silent ballroom. It was his wedding speech, a torrent of heartfelt promises and poetic declarations of love. "They say that every man dreams of a moment like this," his voice echoed. "A moment where everything falls into place, where you look at someone and you just know. You know that you've found your other half. Looking at Amelia today, I know that for the first time in my life, I am whole." On screen, the younger Julian raised his glass to Amelia. "To my wife," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "My beautiful, brilliant, incredible wife. You are my compass, my anchor, my one true north. You are not just the love of my life. You are my life. I promise to spend every day of the rest of my life proving that I am worthy of your love. I promise to cherish you, to honor you, and to love you and only you for all of eternity." The irony was so thick, so suffocating, it was almost comical. The guests sat in stunned silence, their gazes shifting from the romantic spectacle on the screen to the sordid tableau on the stage. There was Julian kneeling before his mistress, the echoes of his eternal vows to his wife ringing in his ears. There was Isabella, her face a thunderous canvas of fury and humiliation. And there at her table near the front was Amelia. She rose to her feet, a vision of ethereal calm in the eye of the storm. The midnight blue of her gown seemed to absorb the chaos around her, her posture regale her expression, unreadable. She was no longer a victim. She was a queen about to reclaim her throne. Every eye in the room was now on her as she began to walk towards the stage. Her steps slow, deliberate, and utterly fearless. The gentle swell of her pregnancy was now unmistakable, a silent, powerful testament to the depth of Julian's betrayal. As she reached the stage, a technician acting on a prearranged signal handed her a microphone. She didn't look at Julian, not yet. She addressed the crowd, her voice as clear and as cold as ice. "Good evening, everyone," she began, her voice steady, devoid of any tremor. "I apologize for the interruption. My husband, as you can see, is a man of grand gestures. It seems he has so much love to give, he decided one wife simply wasn't enough." A wave of shocked laughter, quickly stifled, went through the room. Julian scrambled to his feet, his face ashen. "Amelia," he stammered, reaching for her. "What are you doing?" Amelia finally turned her gaze upon him, and for the first time that night, Julian saw his wife. Not the gentle, forgiving Amelia he had taken for granted, but a woman of formidable strength, her eyes blazing with a cold, righteous fury. "What am I doing?" she repeated, her voice dangerously soft. "I'm simply providing a little context, Julian. A little trip down memory lane. I thought your new fiancé," she spat the word like a curse, her eyes flicking to Isabella, "might appreciate knowing the kind of promises you're capable of making. And breaking." She then turned her attention to Isabella, who stood frozen, the magnificent Winston blue diamond on her finger, now feeling like a shackle. "Isabella, isn't it?" Amelia said, her voice dripping with a polite, venomous sweetness. "That's a beautiful ring. The Winston blue. A truly remarkable diamond. Did he tell you its history? It's said to bring its wearer great fortune, but only if the love it represents is true. Otherwise, it's just a very expensive, very beautiful curse." Isabella, for the first time, found her voice. "You have no right," she began, her voice shrill with indignation. "No right." Amelia cut her off, taking a step closer. "I am his wife. I am the mother of his unborn child." She let that revelation hang in the air, a bombshell that sent another shockwave through the room. "I have every right. You, on the other hand, are a footnote in a story that is about to come to a very abrupt end." Amelia turned back to Julian, her voice dropping to a near whisper, yet carrying the weight of a death sentence. "Did you really think I wouldn't find out, Julian? Did you think I was that naive, that blind, while you were whispering sweet nothings in her ear? I was at home, feeling our baby kick for the first time. While you were buying her diamonds, I was decorating a nursery. You weren't just cheating on me, Julian. You were cheating on our family. You were cheating on the future you promised us." She paused, taking a deep breath, her composure absolute. "This grand romantic gesture," she said, gesturing to the pathetic scene on the stage. "It's not about love. It's about your ego, your insatiable need for more. More money, more success, more adoration. You didn't fall in love with her, Julian. You fell in love with a younger, more flattering reflection of yourself." Then she delivered the final devastating blow. "And you know what the saddest part is? You've not only destroyed our marriage, our family, you've just destroyed the very empire you're so proud of." Julian stared at her, a flicker of confusion in his eyes. He thought this was just about his infidelity, a messy, public divorce. He had no idea that the ground beneath his feet was about to crumble. He had no idea that his wife, the quiet, unassuming art curator, was about to bring his entire world crashing down around him. He had underestimated her. And in the world of high-stakes business and brutal betrayals, underestimating your opponent was a fatal mistake. A cavernous silence descended upon the grand ballroom, a void so absolute it seemed to swallow the music, the whispers, and the very air itself. On the massive screen, the image of a beaming Amelia in her wedding dress faded, replaced by the stark, glowing logo of Nexus Innovations, a silent monument to the lie that had just been exposed. Julian remained on one knee, frozen in a grotesque parody of a romantic proposal. The Winston blue diamond on Isabella's finger, which moments ago had been a symbol of triumphant new love, now felt like a shard of ice, a cold, heavy weight of impending doom. Julian's mind, usually a fortress of strategic calculation, was a maelstrom of chaos. This can't be happening. The thought ricocheted through his skull. It's a prank, a sick, twisted joke. He scrambled to his feet, a jerky, uncoordinated movement that betrayed his panic. He forced a laugh, a harsh, grating sound that echoed unnaturally in the stillness. "Well," he said, his voice straining for a lightness it could not find. "It seems my wife has a flair for the dramatic. A little trip down memory lane, it seems. Very sentimental." He turned to the audience, his smile a desperate cracking veneer. "But as I was saying, tonight is about the future." His words trailed off into nothingness. No one was listening. Every single eye in that room, from the powerful venture capitalists at the front tables to the service staff lingering by the walls, was fixed on the woman walking toward the stage. Amelia moved with the slow, deliberate grace of a tidal wave, gathering its strength before it crashes ashore. She was no longer the heartbroken wife. She was an avenging angel, her face a mask of serene, chilling composure. The microphone was in her hand, and as she stepped into the spotlight, she seemed to draw all the light in the room, leaving Julian and Isabella in a sudden, cold shadow. "Good evening, everyone." Her voice, amplified by the speakers, was calm and clear, yet it cut through the silence like a surgeon's scalpel. "I do apologize for the interruption. My husband, Julian Thorne, as you can see, is a man of grand gestures. It seems he has so much love to give." She paused, her eyes sweeping over the crowd. He decided one wife simply wasn't enough. A few shocked gasps, followed by a ripple of nervous, incredulous laughter, broke the tension. Julian's face, already pale, turned a ghastly shade of white. This was not a sentimental prank. This was a declaration of war. "Amelia, stop this," he hissed, taking a step towards her. "You're making a scene. We can discuss this at home." Home. Amelia's laugh was a soft, brittle sound, devoid of all warmth. "You mean the house I built? The bed we shared, the nursery I decorated for our child?" "Which home are you referring to, Julian? Because it seems to me you've made your new home in hotel suites and whispered lies." She turned her gaze on Isabella, who stood frozen, her mind racing. "This is a disaster." He promised he had handled her. He promised she was weak. Isabella's instinct was to fight back, to assert her claim. "You have no right to be up here," she snapped, her voice higher and shriller than she intended. "This is our moment, your moment." Amelia's eyes, cold and assessing, raked over Isabella from head to toe. "Your moment of what, exactly? Of triumph, of stealing another woman's husband? Let me tell you what this moment is. It's a lesson in the true cost of things." She gestured to the magnificent diamond on Isabella's hand. "That is the Winston Blue. A truly remarkable diamond. Did he tell you its history? It's said to bring its wearer great fortune, but only if the love it represents is true. Otherwise, it's just a very expensive, very beautiful curse. And darling." Amelia leaned in slightly, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was nonetheless audible to the front rows. "Looking at you now, I'd say you're thoroughly cursed." Then she turned from the personal to the professional, her focus shifting to the audience, specifically to the tables where the most powerful investors were seated. Her entire demeanor changed. The wronged wife receded, and a formidable new persona emerged, the savvy, aggrieved business partner. "Many of you in this room are investors in Nexus Innovations," she began, her tone now crisp and authoritative. "You invested your capital and your trust in a company you believed to be stable-led by a man you believed to be a visionary. But I ask you, how can you trust a man with your millions when he cannot even honor the most sacred personal contract of his life?" This struck a chord. Phones previously held up to record the drama were now being used for a different purpose. Thumbs flew across screens as investors sent frantic, coded messages to their teams. The narrative had shifted from a salacious affair to a question of leadership, of stability, of risk. "Julian likes to tell the story," Amelia continued, pacing the stage slowly, "of how he started Nexus Innovations in a dusty garage with nothing but a dream and a few $1,000s of his own money. It's a fantastic story. It's the myth of the self-made man, the narrative upon which his entire public persona is built. It's a powerful story." She stopped and looked directly at Julian. And it is a complete and utter lie. Julian's blood ran cold. No, she wouldn't. He had buried that truth so deep, had rewritten history so effectively, that even he barely remembered it. The truth, Amelia announced, her voice ringing with the clarity of a bell, is that Nexus Innovations was born not in a garage, but in a lawyer's office. It was funded not by a few $1,000s, but by $50 million of seed capital. Money that did not come from a venture capitalist or a bank loan that recognized Julian's supposed genius. It came from a single source, my family's trust. The ballroom erupted. The low murmur exploded into a roar of conversation. Julian felt the floor tilt beneath his feet. This was a catastrophic blow, striking at the very heart of his carefully constructed legacy. He was not the self-made titan he claimed to be. He was a man who had been bankrolled by his wife's family. And my grandfather, Amelia's voice sliced through the noise, silencing the room once more, was a man who had seen his share of charlatans and opportunists. He believed in Julian's idea, but he was a shrewd judge of character. He saw the ambition, but he also saw the recklessness. So he insisted on a small, simple clause in the investment agreement. A safeguard. He called it his integrity clause. A morality clause. Julian stared at her, his mind a blank wall of white noise. Morality clause. The words barely registered. It was a faint, dusty memory, a piece of legal jargon he had dismissed as the ramblings of an old man irrelevant in the face of his inevitable success. The clause is very specific, Amelia explained as if lecturing a class. It states that in the event of a gross breach of personal and professional trust, an act of such profound betrayal and public infidelity that it brings shame upon our family name and by extension jeopardizes the ethical standing of the company, his money founded the controlling interest in the shares, purchased with that $50 million, automatically reverts to me. If the previous revelation had been a bombshell, this was a nuclear detonation. The implications were staggering. At the company's current valuation, that initial investment now represented a 40% stake in Nexus Innovations, not a minority share, a controlling interest. "You're lying!" Julian finally found his voice, a desperate, strangled cry. "That's not legal. It wouldn't hold up." "Oh, it's perfectly legal, Mr. Thorne, and it will hold up in any court in the world." The new voice was deep resonant and commanded immediate respect. The crowd parted like the Red Sea as a distinguished silver-haired man in an impeccably tailored suit made his way to the stage. It was Mr. David Chen, a titan of Asian finance, a man whose reputation for integrity was as legendary as his fortune. He was, as Julian knew, with a sinking feeling of absolute dread, the executor of Amelia's family estate. Mr. Chen ascended the stage and stood beside Amelia, placing a protective paternal hand on her shoulder. He looked at Julian, not with anger, but with a profound and heavy disappointment. "I was your father-in-law's closest friend and his personal attorney for 30 years. Mr. Chen said, his voice a low rumble of authority. "I personally drafted that clause. I advised him that while Julian was brilliant, his character was a high-risk investment. The clause was non-negotiable." He turned to the audience. "And as the executor of the estate, I have already filed the necessary paperwork with our legal teams. As of this moment, Miss Amelia Thorne is the majority shareholder and the controlling power of Nexus Innovations." The house of cards did not just collapse. It was annihilated. Julian stumbled backwards, his hand clutching his chest as if he'd been physically shot. He had lost his company. In the span of 10 minutes on the night that was meant to be his crowning glory, he had lost everything. He spun around his mind, searching for a target, for someone to blame other than himself. His wild eyes landed on Isabella. She was trying to back away, to melt into the shadows, her face a mask of pure terror. Her own scheme was unraveling her dreams of wealth and power, turning to ash. "Not so fast, Miss Rosie." Mr. Chen's voice was like a whip crack. He held up a tablet, its screen glowing. "It seems Mr. Thorne's catastrophic lack of judgment was not limited to his marriage." He addressed Julian directly. "For the past 6 months, Nexus has been bleeding sensitive data, product roadmaps, R&D on our next-gen processors, confidential financial projections. We knew we had a mole, but we couldn't find the source. We suspected a high-level breach." He paused. "We were wrong. The breach wasn't high-level. It was intimate." He turned the tablet to face Julian. On the screen was a decrypted communication log, a series of damning emails and texts between the account Bella Rossi and a senior executive at Aperture Dynamics Nexus Innovations' most ruthless competitor. It was a meticulous record of corporate espionage. Isabella had been seducing him for secrets, playing the part of the love-struck mistress while systematically gutting his company from the inside. Julian stared at the screen, then at Isabella. The betrayal was so complete, so absolute, it was almost surreal. He had been a pawn in 2 different games and had lost them both. All the humiliation, all the rage, all the terror he felt coalesced into a single explosive point. "You!" he snarled, lunging towards her. "You did this!" 2 large security guards materializing as if from nowhere at Mr. Chen's subtle signal intercepted him, holding him back. Isabella shrieked, cowering away from him. "I did what you wanted!" she screamed back, her facade of sophistication shattering completely. "You wanted to be free. You wanted to be with me. I wanted a partner, not a viper who would sell me out to the highest bidder." Julian roared, struggling against the guard's iron grip. The scene had descended into sheer pandemonium. Paparazzi who had been held at the perimeter broke through the lines, their flashes exploding like a volley of gunfire. In the midst of the chaos, one of Mr. Chen's assistants, a stern-faced woman, walked calmly up to the sobbing Isabella. "I believe this belongs to Mr. Chen's client," she said coolly, and with practiced efficiency, she slid the Winston blue diamond from Isabella's finger. The cursed diamond was dropped unceremoniously into a simple evidence bag. That final act seemed to break something in Julian. The fight went out of him. His body went limp, and he sagged against the guards holding him up. His gaze was vacant, his face a hollow mask of utter devastation. He looked out at the sea of faces. Faces of former friends, colleagues, and investors, and saw nothing but contempt, pity, and the morbid fascination of strangers watching a spectacular car crash. He was no longer Julian Thorne, the tech visionary. He was a joke, a failure, a man who had built a glittering empire on a foundation of lies, only to see it all brought down by the 2 women he thought he could control. As the flashbulbs continued to pop, searing the image of his ruin onto the world's collective memory, he finally understood. This wasn't just the end of his career. It was the end of his life as he knew it. He stood on the brightly lit stage of his own, making a fallen king in a kingdom of rubble. Of course, here is a rewritten, significantly longer and more detailed version of Part 5, delving deeper into the aftermath and the characters' new realities. The sun that rose over Singapore the next morning seemed to Julian like a hostile, interrogating eye. He was huddled in the cavernous living room of his penthouse suite, the floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of a world that no longer felt like his. The silence of the suite was a physical presence, a heavy blanket smothering him, punctuated only by the incessant, angry buzzing of his phone on the marble coffee table. He hadn't slept. How could he? Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the flash of cameras. The cold disappointment in Mr. Chen's eyes, the triumphant, chilling calm on Amelia's face. His world had been reduced to the glowing screen of a tablet in his trembling hands. The headlines screamed at him from every major news outlet on the planet. The Thorn Betrayal, CEO loses billion-dollar empire in shocking gala proposal. Nexus in freefall. Wife seizes control after morality clause triggered the CEO and the spy. How a scorned wife uncovered a multi-billion-dollar espionage plot. Social media was a raging inferno. The hashtag #GeilerOffLies was trending globally. Memes of his devastated face were already viral. He was no longer a person. He was a spectacle, a cautionary tale for the ages his downfall consumed as entertainment by millions. He finally picked up his phone, his thumb hovering over Amelia's name. He had called 37 times. He had sent 22 rambling, incoherent texts, a digital tapestry of apologies, accusations, and desperate pleas, all unanswered. The silence from her was more damning than any angry reply could ever be. Miles away in a serene, minimalist suite overlooking the gardens by the bay. Amelia was the picture of tranquility. She sat opposite Mr. Chen at a large mahogany table, sipping chamomile tea. Her phone was off. Spread before them were not tabloids, but corporate financial statements, legal documents, and a draft of a press release. There was no celebration, no gloating. There was only work to be done. The board is convening an emergency session via video conference at 0900. Mr. Chen said, his voice calm and steady. The motion to remove Julian as CEO and chairman is a formality at this point. They're terrified. The stock is projected to lose 60% of its value at opening bell. We need to halt trading, Amelia said, her voice clear and decisive. She had already shed the skin of the artist and donned the armor of a leader. We can't let panic dictate our value. We need to issue a statement immediately, one that reassures our employees and our real investors that Nexus is not Julian Thorn. It's bigger than him. Its future is secure. And what is that future, Amelia? Mr. Chen asked, watching her carefully. Amelia looked out the window, her hand resting protectively on her belly. My grandfather invested in an idea, David, an idea about connecting people. Julian turned that into a machine for accumulating wealth and power. He became obsessed with growth, with winning, and he lost sight of the why. The future of Nexus is in rediscovering that why. Technology with a conscience, innovation with integrity. That will be our story. Mr. Chen smiled a rare, genuine expression of pride. The old man would have been so proud of his granddaughter. She had not only inherited his fortune, she had inherited his wisdom. The weeks that followed were a brutal lesson in consequence for Julian. The emergency board meeting was a swift, bloodless execution. He appeared via a video link, a disheveled, hollowed-out version of himself, and listened in sullency as the people who had once hung on his every word voted unanimously to sever all ties with him. He was stripped of his titles, his stock options, his severance package. The company he had considered an extension of himself had surgically amputated him. His financial ruin was just as swift. Lawsuits from shareholders piled up, and his personal assets were frozen pending the litigation. The sprawling penthouse, the collection of vintage cars, the private jet, they were all just assets to be liquidated bargaining chips in a game he had already lost. Friends who had once clamored for his attention now crossed the street to avoid him. He was radioactive. Isabella Rossi's downfall was even more public and pathetic. The images of her being led from her chic apartment in handcuffs, her face streaked with tears, were a stark counterpoint to the glamorous photos she had so carefully curated. Her bail was set at an impossibly high figure, and Aperture Dynamics, the company she had betrayed Nexus for, immediately disavowed any knowledge of her actions, leaving her to face the wolves alone. At her first hearing, her lawyer argued she was a pawn, a woman blinded by love. But the prosecution laid out the evidence of encrypted financial transactions and damning communications, painting a picture not of a lovelorn fool, but of a calculating and greedy operative. Her fantasy had ended in a beige-colored courtroom, her future to be decided by strangers. While their worlds imploded, Amelia's was expanding. She returned from Singapore and walked into the glass and steel headquarters of Nexus Innovations, not as the CEO's wife, but as its leader. A palpable tension hung in the air as she addressed the entire company in the main atrium. Employees who had known her only as a pretty face at holiday parties now looked at her with a mixture of fear, awe, and curiosity. "I know there is a lot of uncertainty right now," she began, her voice steady and sure, needing no podium or notes. "You read the headlines, you saw the drama, and you are right to be concerned. But I am not here to talk about the past. I am here to talk about our future." She laid out her vision with a passion and clarity that captivated the room. She spoke not of market caps and quarterly earnings, but of purpose, of building products that helped people, of creating a workplace culture free from the toxic, high-pressure ego that had defined Julian's reign. "For too long," she concluded, "this company has been a reflection of one man's ambition. From today, it will be a reflection of our collective integrity." She didn't receive a standing ovation. The shock was still too raw for that. But she earned something far more valuable, a flicker of hope, a glimmer of respect. The ensuing months were a period of quiet, intense transformation. Amelia, with Mr. Chen as her mentor, proved to be a natural leader. She was decisive, empathetic, and had an artist's eye for talent and potential where others saw only data points. She dismantled the boys' club culture, promoting talented women to leadership positions and fostering an enthronement of genuine collaboration. Nexus began to stabilize, then to heal. She sold the monstrous penthouse and bought a charming, light-filled house in a quiet, tree-lined suburb, a world away from the cold glamour of her former life. She turned one of the rooms into a nursery, painting murals of gentle animals and starry skies on the walls. In this sanctuary, she prepared for motherhood, finding a deep, quiet joy that had been absent from her life for so long. She was building a new life, a new company, and a new family, all on her own terms. Julian, meanwhile, existed in a self-imposed exile. The lawsuits were eventually settled, leaving him with a fraction of his former wealth, enough to live comfortably, but not enough to ever reclaim his place in the pantheon of the ultra-rich. He lived alone in a sterile modern apartment, his days unstructured and empty. He read philosophy, he took long, aimless walks. He sat for hours, staring at the city that had once been his kingdom. For the first time in his life, with all the distractions stripped away, he was forced to confront the man in the mirror, and he didn't like what he saw. He saw the insecurity that had driven his ambition, the ego that had fueled his betrayal, the hollowness at the core of his being. A week before Amelia's due date, He sent her a single handwritten letter. It contained no excuses, no justifications. It was just a simple, humble request to see her one last time, to say what he needed to say in person. After 2 days of deliberation, she agreed. They met in a public park, a neutral ground beneath the gentle shade of old oak trees. Julian was already there, sitting on a bench, looking shockingly ordinary. The expensive suit was gone, replaced by simple trousers and a sweater. The predatory confidence had been replaced by a quiet, weary sadness. Amelia approached her steps, slow and steady, her large, round belly leading the way. She didn't sit down. "Julian," she said, her voice soft, without malice. He stood up, his hands shoved awkwardly in his pockets. "Amelia, thank you for coming. You look beautiful, healthy." "I am," she replied simply. "I know I'm sorry isn't enough." He began, his voice hoarse, his gaze fixed on the ground. "I've said it to myself 1,000 times. What I did, it wasn't just a mistake. It was a failure of character, a failure of love. I was so terrified of being ordinary, of being second best, that I built this persona, this Julian Thorne, the visionary, and I started to believe it myself. I thought I needed more, something new and exciting, to prove to the world and to myself that I was extraordinary." He finally looked up, his eyes filled with a profound, soul-deep regret. "And the whole time, the most extraordinary thing in my life was right in front of me. You, our life, our son. I had everything, and I burned it all to the ground for the sake of my own vanity. I didn't just betray you, Amelia. I betrayed myself. I destroyed the best man I ever was, the man you married." Amelia listened in silence, her expression unreadable. She had expected excuses, perhaps even a final attempt at manipulation. She had not expected this raw, painful honesty. "I know there's no going back," he continued, a single tear tracing a path down his cheek. "I don't deserve you. I don't deserve to be a father. But I had to tell you this. I had to let you know that I see it. I finally see it all." A long silence hung between them, filled only by the rustling of leaves and the distant laughter of children. "I'm glad you see it, Julian," Amelia said at last, her voice gentle but firm. "Not for my sake, but for yours. You have a long road ahead of you to figure out who you are without the money and the power." She took a breath. "Our son will be born next week. His name will be Theo, after my grandfather. He will know who his father is. I will show him pictures, I will tell him stories of the good times. I will not raise him on a foundation of anger." She took a step closer, her hand resting on her belly. "But he will also know the truth, not the sordid details, but the essential lesson. He will learn that integrity is the only currency that truly matters. He will learn that true strength is about kindness, not cruelty. And he will learn that a man's worth is measured by the promises he keeps. That will be your legacy to him, Julian. A lesson." She looked at him one last time, a flicker of the love that once was now transformed into a sad, distant compassion. "I forgive you, Julian. I have to, for my own peace and for Theo's. But forgiveness and reconciliation are two different things. Our story is over." With that, she turned and walked away, not looking back. She walked towards her future, towards her new life, towards the waiting arms of motherhood. Julian stood frozen, watching her go, until she was out of sight. He was alone, but for the first time he felt a flicker not of despair, but of something else. the devastating, painful, and necessary beginning of penance. The ashes of his old life were behind him, and before him a vast empty landscape where perhaps something new and honest could finally begin to grow. And there you have it, a story that proves that hell hath no fury. Like a woman scorned, especially when that woman is smart, resourceful, and about to become the majority shareholder of her husband's company. Amelia's story is a powerful reminder that true strength isn't about avoiding heartbreak, but about how we rise from the ashes. It's a story of empowerment, of taking control of your own narrative, and of serving revenge, not hot, not cold, but with a controlling interest and a killer business plan. What did you think of Amelia's epic takedown? Was Julian's downfall deserved? Let us know in the comments below.